Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome back to the next in my Books of 2019 series. I mentioned in the first video, the worst books of 2019, that I love this year. I love getting all reflective and getting to look at a year in review. And I'm going to start with the more negative videos and end with the more positive to kind of jump into the new year on the right foot. So last time I discussed the worst books. This time I am discussing the top 5 most disappointing books I read over 2019. Now, these aren't necessarily totally bad books, but they're books that had a lot more promise than they actually followed through with. In most of these cases, the synopsis had awesome promise, and then the actual execution wasn't really there. So first up is The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. I got an arc of this early this year from Bookish First, and I was immediately intrigued by the premise. This is set in Granada during the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition, when all the sultanates are kind of falling apart. Our protagonist is Fatima, a concubine of the Sultan, as he's basically surrendering. And while all of the Spanish are there to take them over, she accidentally lets slip that her very, very dear friend Hassan, the map maker, has some magical powers, and the people of the Spanish Inquisition immediately decide that he should die. So she has to go on the run with her friend. And I love that there was a gay rep. Hassan is gay, and it kind of is a theme throughout with Fatima, how they love each other deeply, but he can never really love her in that way, and how she sometimes low-key resents that he'll end up finding a man to share a full romantic relationship with. And low-key, some of her thoughts do not make her the most likable protagonist, even though she has a lot of strength and agency, and I appreciated that. So the first 2/3 of this book were pretty good. There was a lot of Islamic folklore involved, and it was pretty interesting framework. And then the last third lost it. And it felt like an entirely different genre of book than the first one, because while there were fantasy elements throughout the entirety of it, the last third jumps into straight magical realism and all the surreal qualities that brings, and a ton of new characters were added. It seemed at the last second, a slew of new characters were being added with 100 pages to go. So they were going for a found family thing, but it didn't really register because you just didn't have enough time with them. And there was, without getting spoilery, a last-minute redemptive arc that made no sense, that had no real setup. It was kind of just there, redeemed. And I am a sucker for a good redemption arc, but you gotta do it the right way. So the first 2 thirds of this book were fantastic, and then I just really lost it in the last third. I think I ended up giving it maybe 3 stars. I do have a review of this one, I believe, but it just generally didn't vibe with me at all. Up next, another book that had a fantastic premise that didn't exactly follow through with it, and that is Bleeding Earth by Caitlin Ward. I actually found this in the clearance section of Barnes & Noble, and I can low-key understand why it was there. So this is a very interesting post-apocalyptic scenario in which the Earth starts bleeding. Literally, blood just starts bubbling out of the ground until there are rivers of it running down the streets, and also the blood has hair and bone in it. It's gross, but in the good way, if that makes sense. And the blood can basically infect the water and low-key turn you crazy if you ingest it. And it was a really intriguing idea, and we follow our protagonist, Leah, but she does the teenage thing of YA where she's way more invested in stupid high school things than the fact that there's literally rivers of blood running through the streets. They found out that, hey, there's looting, it could be difficult to breathe, stay inside, keep your water supply close. But there's a party going, so she wants to break out and go to the party. And I hate that in a YA book, because it never makes your protagonist look anything but stupid. And then everyone's like, but teenagers, no, stupid teenagers. Stupid teenagers do that. And it was just, she's so worried about coming out to her parents as gay and her first girlfriend. Actually, is it her coming out as gay? Or no, it's her girlfriend that doesn't want to come out. And I really wish that there had been a lot more emphasis on this insanely cool concept instead of the high school dramas. Because there's like this entire section dedicated to Leah having a fallout with her friend over the course of this whole nonsense, and it's like, people are being infected with crazy blood. Why are we worried about these texts? And that's why this was so disappointing to me. Like, I want to see this done differently and have it actually be the focus of the book, not have it be like this weird backdrop to relationship and high school problems. I did love that there was a WLW romance, but like, that was it. I just don't like traditionally published YA. I think that's just what this is. Up next was another book I got from Bookish First with a really intriguing premise that did not follow through, and that is In the Night of Memory by Linda Lagarde Grover. This is about two young Native American girls who are taken from their mother and put in the foster care system. And this starts before the Indian Child Welfare Act, which states that all Native American children should be given back to their tribe to be taken care of. And so they were kind of sent away and were without their own culture for a very long period of time. And this book talks about their journey back home to their tribe as things like the Indian Child Welfare Act takes place. I love that concept, and I love the idea of following them through and watching them come back to their own culture and the effect that U.S. government practices, even up through the 70s, separated Native American children from their tribes. That's not really the focus, though, and that's kind of strange. See, I thought In the Night of Memory was referring to, like, a night of memory after the girls return and they're, like, hearing stories from their, like, tribe. Not really how it worked out. It's basically a fictionalized biography of the girls, but not just them. It's also, like, all of these different people of the family. So it'd be, like, the distant relatives that ended up taking them in. When they come back to the tribe, we gotta find out their backstory, their mother's backstory, which low-key, hers was probably more important, and like this great aunt's backstory. And it's like, why are we shoving so much into this? Because this is not a long book. I don't even think it's 300 pages. It's not. And there was so much involved, and I think you see the girls from as young as 3 and 4 up through like their 30s in a 200-page book. So it's like nothing really feels all that dwelt on in the story because there's just so much of it shoved in so few pages. And a lot of it is talk about things like how vulnerable Native American women are. And I really like that sub-theme because Native American women statistically are one of the most at-risk demographics. They're the most likely to go missing with no one there to find them. And that was heartbreaking, but a very good theme for the book, I thought. And again, it's one of those things where the concept is really cool, and if it had just focused on the girls, I believe their names are Azure and Rain. So they're really cool ideas, but it was so sporadic and focused on so many different things that those ideas never really came through. If you are interested in Own Voices Native American Stories, I believe the author is a member of the Ojibwa tribe, if I remember correctly. So it is Own Voices, and it is still really interesting. You could have just done so much more with it. Up next was one that I was really intrigued by the premise, even though it's not a genre I normally read, and that is The Mermaid Upstairs by Jamie Lilo. I also included this on my In December wrap-up because I reviewed it for that. This is all about a young woman who is in a car accident with her mother, and her mother receives severe head trauma and wakes up thinking she's a mermaid. And so our young, I believe she is a teenage protagonist, Emily, must essentially handle a mother that doesn't think she's her mother. Mermaid Nora doesn't remember having any children. And there's all of the stigma attached to mental trauma and other people in the town making fun of her, and Emily is like losing her mind. But again, similar to Bleeding Earth, so much of what could be a very rich idea in dealing with trauma and what it's like to be the family of someone dealing with that is focused on these minute, pointless high school things where Emily spends a gigantic period of time really just being annoyed at her mother who is going through head trauma and like being annoyed that the embarrassment her mother could cause could keep the popular boy at school from liking her. And I'm sitting there like, hey, if your crush can't understand that your mother has head trauma, leave him be. He's not the one. And it also just took the general idea very lightheartedly, almost sitcom-like, where it was like, LOL, Nora thinks she's a mermaid, but it's like, no, she's had head trauma. This is like seriously the problem. It's a mental health issue. It's a struggle, but it's like, oh, mermaid Nora, what are you like? And And in general, we go back to, I don't do a lot of YA, especially this kind of YA where the premise or the plot of the thing, the actual setup, seems more like background noise to the high school things. And near the end, it kind of redeemed itself a little when Emily finally realizes that she has to work with her mom instead of just trying to, hide her mom away and yell at her. It gets a little bit better, and there are some themes that discuss the struggles that Nora faced because her mother was a social worker, and the insane amounts of trauma that she witnessed throughout the kids that she worked with kind of led to that, how her mind just needed a break. And so there are some good themes about letting yourself step back from the horrors of life and enjoying more lighthearted things at times. But they were very much buried in a lot of annoying things, and it could have been so much better. It could have been so much more, respectful of the take it was trying to get across. So, not the worst, but definitely disappointing. Up next, this book, I know some other people on BookTube really love it. It was the group pick for one of the Witchathons, although I cannot remember which one now that I think about it. And that is When the Moon Was Ours by Anna Marie Michelmore. This is a surreal, magical realism tale all about this young teenage couple essentially finding each other and falling in love after years. Only one of them is trans. Samir has hidden his physical body, essentially. No one knows that he was born Samira, and it's kind of this whole big thing, and there's these 3 bully girls that uncover it and want to give him hell. And the idea of it was fairly interesting. In this case, they did stick with the premise. The idea was still the center of the story for the most part. The big thing I had with it was I discovered I really don't like magical realism. And I'd never met a book that was as established in magical realism as this one. And I discovered, no, not really loving it. And also, it had the trope that I discussed earlier, which is sudden and ultimate redemption for some characters that was not hinted at very much beforehand. One character, might have had some hints at redemption, but the other one is I suddenly see the error of my ways and will be a much better person because you plucky protagonist stood up to me. No. You can't just redeem multiple characters who were horrible and have it work. Now, I know this is very much beloved, and I know the trope of bullies being redeemed is very much beloved, but as someone who works in elementary school and has watched kids repeatedly let themselves be bullied by the same kids under the idea that they can change them for the better, I'm never a fan of that trope, because the amount of times I had to tell kids, if they're just going to keep being mean to you, just stop going around them. It's not your job to be their friend if they're going to keep being mean. So, in general, if you love this book, have at it. I don't like magical realism at all. I have heard from people who are trans or closer to the trans community than me that it is pretty decent rep. So if you're looking for that, I believe the author is trans. Yes. Editing Margaret. Hi, Editing Margaret here, not in the corner of the video, to jump in to say Anna Marie Michelmore is non-binary, so probably should have gotten that ahead of time, and also their husband is transgender. So there is still a connection there, and it actually makes the story even sweeter, but I just wanted to jump in there, throw that out, and I have got to start researching gender pronouns before I talk about authors. Thank you. But so if you do like magical realism and you do want trans rep, that's a good take for you. It was just the final straw to prove to me that A, Rhiannon from Crescent Moon Reads and I had very different tastes, and B, I just do not gel with magical realism at all. So those were my top 5 most disappointing reads. They weren't as bad as the worst reads, but they could have been so much better. If you've had any really disappointing reads of the year, let me down in the comments below. I'm really interested in that. If you know that you really have different tastes than me, let me know that. I know my tastes are maybe a little bit strange. I've never seen anyone quite as obsessed with space operas, with a few exceptions. But anyways, with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.